Hi, in today's video we have a pair of L model NuTone 4 and 8 note chime bases. When I think of L model chimes, I always think of 1960s chimes. K model chimes are generally, in my mind, are 1950s chimes, and L model chimes are 1960s chimes. However, this is a K46, or it's from a K46, and this one's clearly dated as September 1957. And this one over here is from an L42, and it's clearly dated as September 1959. So these are 2 years apart, and these are the earliest and a very different design of an L model chime base than I have seen before. I have done a fairly extensive rebuild video on another model L42 chime base. That one was from 1961, so that would have been 2 years after this one had made. And while there are some similarities between this one and the one in the previous video, these are distinctly different in one aspect, and I thought I would take a moment to show you. This one over here from 1957 is one that I acquired and belongs to me, and this one from 1959 was sent in by a customer to have it serviced. So let's take a look at how these are different and why I think NuTone made them the way they did. Through the K model series chimes, the chimes had the ability to ring either 4 or 8 notes for the front door, and then K model chimes, the only other connection was a single note for a rear door. And that's all you got on a K model chime. There was no side door connection. So apparently, starting with L model chimes, someone at NuTone thought, we should probably have some way to have 3 doors on our chime. I suppose some houses have 3 buttons, and also it probably was to keep up with what other chime manufacturers were making at the time and to make their NuTone's products more competitive or more attractive so more people would buy them. So if we look at the terminal strip on the September 1957 chime, you can easily see you have your row of screw connections here, and this top one is marked as common, which is one side of the transformer. The second one is marked as tran, which would be the other side from the transformer. Then you have, it says 4 or 8 notes, which is the third screw, 2 notes, which is the next screw, and 1 note, which is the last screw. They're not labeled as front, rear, and side, just 4, 8 note, 2 notes, or 1 note, and that way you can decide, I suppose, on your own how you want to hook the buttons up. Of course, I think you would normally have the front door on the 4 or 8 note chime, and it would seem to me, if it was left up to me as the installer, the rear door would be 2 notes, and because that's the second most important door probably, and then the side door would be a single note. You also have here on the side, you have the arcing volume control, which you can move up and down, and as I showed in the earlier video, you can actually move it all the way up to the very top to the off position, and that shuts the chime off altogether. If we look at the 1959 chime, we'll see that it's similar but somewhat different. On the L42 chime from September of 1959, the terminal strip is labeled somewhat differently, and it's actually somewhat clearer, I think, to read. The top screw is common, the next screw is trans or transformer, then we have 4 or 8 notes, and then this screw is labeled as side, and this one is labeled as rear instead of 2 notes and 1 note. And I think that probably makes it a lot clearer to the installer since they were putting it in. Now, you might be thinking, well, what's the big deal about these chime bases? Why are they in a video? Because all chimes are hooked up like this. But that's not really the case. So here's why it's different. Up until I've seen these, and I've never seen chime bases like this before, all 4 and 8 note long tube NuTone chimes all the way up through the end of the 1950s, you had 4 or 8 notes for the front door and a single note for the rear door. Now all of a sudden you have a third door option, which would be the side door, but if we refer back to the other one, apparently the side door is 1 note and the rear door is now 2 notes. Later on, like in the 1961 L42 chime video, the front door would be 4 or 8 notes for the front door, a single note for the side door and a different single note for the rear door. And these chimes are actually very different. And when this one came in for repair, it had something unusual about it that I actually have to scratch my head a little bit to figure out what it was about. So here we're looking at the bottom of both of the chimes. I have them propped up so you can see them, and we have our solenoids. We have solenoids number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. For the most part, solenoids 1, 3, and 4, and 1, 3, and 4 are your standard run-of-the-mill NuTone long tube door chime solenoids. Nothing special about them at all. However, number 2 is very different. Number 2, we have this device on the back of the solenoid here, and we have a sort of similar device on the back of the solenoid here. And this was puzzling to me when this chime showed up. This is the one the customer sent in because I had never seen anything like this before. He sent this in for 2 reasons. One, for general service to get it working properly again, but also he said that it would occasionally energize plunger number 4 continuously and it wouldn't shut off. The plunger was popped out and you could hear it kind of buzzing in there, and he couldn't figure out why it was doing that, so he decided to send it to me to let me see if I could figure it out. When these came in, I thought, oh, these are just L model chimes, nothing special here. And then I took it out of the box and turned it over and saw this and thought, whoa, wait, what's this? I've never seen anything like this before. So let's take a look and see. I'm going to take apart the chime base I own. So this is the one from September 1957 because the other one belongs to the customer and its repair is actually already has been completed, and I don't want to take it all apart again just to show you, but they are very much alike. So if we go ahead and take these little screws out, and we carefully remove the cover, what you find inside is something unusual. We'll have to stand it up to keep the parts from falling out. And what we have here under the cover is actually a little switch. So what we have here, what you're looking at, is we have what would be the top half of the body of the switch. That's the black plastic or black Bakelite. I think it's Bakelite. The Bakelite cover. And then we have this contact here, and we have a second contact on this side, and actually there were wires. Here's one of them. These wires were actually soldered onto tabs on either side of the contacts, one there and there's a black one over here. These have both come loose or broken off, but I think they're probably salvageable. And then what we have inside is an unusual plunger assembly. So if I push this out through the front a little bit, you can see it's a totally different type of plunger assembly. It has a different shape. In fact, let's take this one out to show you, in case you haven't seen one. Like so many of them, it's kind of stuck in there. There it goes. So here's the end of number 1, and you can see it's a pretty typical NuTone plunger assembly. It's a round metal rod with a slightly chamfered end on it, and if we pull it out all the way, it has the usual plastic tip, and there's supposed to be a spring inside, which I haven't checked, but there probably is. What we have on this side is totally different. We take it all the way out. You can see it has a totally different type of end on it. It has this milled down end, so it's a much smaller diameter in this area than the body of it. And it has this little flexible, movable tab arrangement on it that flips back and forth. It fits through, it's kind of a stirrup shaped piece of metal, and it fits into these little holes that are in the end of the plunger, and then that allows it to swivel back and forth. And then it has this rectangular tab here on the top that stands up. And when you put this into the solenoid bore, you have to align the little stirrup tab in the slot in the top of the solenoid bore, so it slides in. Slide in for me. Wait. It's a little tricky, like that. So what would happen is, when the solenoid is energized and pushed forward, it's better with the cover on. Okay, so when the solenoid is energized and it's pushed forward, the little stirrup piece with the tab is leaning towards the back of the chime, and as it's pushed forward, it slides beneath the two metal contacts of the switch here and here, and it pops out the front. And then when it's de-energized and the spring goes to shoot it back to its beginning position, the tab on the stirrup shaped piece, see if I can do this in slow motion so you can see it, as it slides back it pivots forward, which makes it taller, and then it rubs across the two contact surfaces, thereby closing the switch contacts on the switch on the back of the solenoid. So it's a rather clever design. The momentum of it shooting backwards would make it lean back again and be ready to go for the next time. So it's all about the momentum of it. As it's shot forward, it's leaning back and it misses the contacts. But then as the spring rockets it back, the momentum shifts its position so it's leaning forward. It touches the contact points, closing the switch. And then when it comes to a rest, the sudden stop makes it lean backwards again. And that's all very clever. Like so many things I've seen in early NuTone chimes, it seems overly complicated for what you're trying to do, and it was probably fraught with problems because this exact design in the 1957 chime is actually different than what's in the customer's 1959 chime. Theirs was simpler, perhaps, although the plunger assembly was somewhat more complicated. It had a more complex shape to it, but it had a different type of switch mechanism that was probably simpler to build and perhaps more reliable. When the customer's unit came in and I saw this on there and I took it apart to see what it was about because I had never seen one of these before, then I was trying to figure out, well, what is its purpose? What does it do? And I looked back in all the literature I had and the few late 50s catalogs that I have, and I couldn't find anything that really referred to it. I looked in part sheets that I have from back in those days, and they didn't really show anything. And I was trying to figure out, well, what is this for? Why is it there? What is the purpose of it? And these are complex electromechanical devices. They have the little circuit boards with all the traces and the revolving armature contacts, and figuring out the mechanical logic of how it all works is a very time-consuming and complicated thing to do. And then it occurred to me that perhaps the easiest way to look at it is it's a switch, and since it's a switch, it's got wires connected to it. So what are the wires connected to? What are the wires for? What does the switch actually do? And what I figured out was it's to provide a two-note ring for the rear door instead of a different tube single note ring for the rear door like the K model chimes have. So the way this chime operates is you can choose 4 or 8 notes for the front door. You have 2 notes for the rear door, and the 2 notes are tube number 3 and tube number 1. So it's ding dong. The rear door is tube number 4, it's just ding. Rear door is ding dong, tubes number 3 and 1, and then 4 or 8 notes for the front door. This was an interesting design choice that NuTone made, and I'm going to guess that it was either too expensive, too problematic, or deemed as unnecessarily complex for what it was they were trying to achieve, because Now, I haven't seen a 1960 chime, but I have seen a 1961 chime, and by then it was already gone. So I think it was a short-lived idea, and they probably realized that for the extra cost of the switch and the complexity of its design, it probably really wasn't worth all the trouble. And it turns out that in the customer's chime, this one, the L42 chime from 1959, the primary problem with it was kind of an ordinary problem in an unusual design. The solenoid bores seriously needed to be cleaned along with the plungers, and the special plunger from solenoid number 3 with the switch on it needs to be particularly clean, and the little contacts in the switch, which were kind of mangled up because I'm sure somebody took it apart long before I ever did, they needed to be readjusted, which is a polite way of saying they needed to be bent back into shape so they would work reliably, because otherwise the sliding plunger with the special end and the little pivoting stirrup piece with the tab on it would get hung up and hold the contacts closed, and when that happens it keeps solenoid number 1 energized all the time, and that was one of the problems with it. It didn't have anything to do with the motor, it didn't have anything to do with the revolving armature assembly or the circuit board. All of those were cleaned also. It was entirely with this little switch assembly, and I can envision that back in the late 50s and the early 60s, when these things were still fairly new, but there weren't a lot of them out there because I don't think they made them for very long, I could see a lot of problems with this. It probably was unnecessarily complicated for what it was. That's one of the differences between really early L model chimes from the really late 50s, even though we all consider them to be 1960s chimes, and later ones that they made. So let's go ahead and take the customer's chime base and hang it and put some tubes on it and hear how it sounds. Okay, so let's give our model L42 from September of 1959 a quick ring. So I've got it set up here on our chime testing base. You might notice the little round cylinders here seen at the top. Those are actually some AA batteries that I'm using. I need to pull the tubes up a little higher. The cords are for really K model chimes, and the tubes hang too low and the strikers miss them. So we've got it hooked up. So we've got front on the top button, side on the second button, and rear on the third button. So let's go ahead. We'll ring the side door first. It's a single note. And for the rear door, you get to hear the 2-note ring of what I assume are only the very earliest L model chimes. And now we'll go ahead and ring the 8-note front door ring. And we'll switch it over to 4 notes with the little switch right here below the motor. And there's our 4 notes. So it's a not often heard version of a very early L model chime. I've never seen one before like this, and if you have one of these, it's probably a rare beast. I hope you found this video to be interesting and helpful. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up on YouTube, because that always helps. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the wheel or on the bell, put in your email address, and every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification from YouTube letting you know so you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.